Today I'm going to talk about the psychological conceptions of environment. After I finish my module, you shall be in a position to learn about the basic principles of environmental psychology, identify what the basic assumptions of environmental psychology are, know about the various theories of environmental psychology, evaluate where and when to apply these principles, and also analyze which theory to use for which setting. Let me start by giving you an introduction about environment. Environment refers to the natural world as a whole or in a particular geographical area, especially as affected by human activity. Environmental psychology is an interdisciplinary field focused on the interplay between the humans and their surroundings. Let me tell you what environmental psychology is. Environmental psychology is an interdisciplinary field focused on the interplay between humans and their surroundings. The field defines the term environment broadly, encompassing natural environments, social settings, built environments, learning environments, and informational environments. Environmental psychology is value and problem oriented. It prioritizes research aiming at solving complex environmental problems. It's always in the pursuit of individual well-being within a larger society, one that predicts the environmental conditions under which humans will behave in a decent and creative manner, aimed at designing, managing, protecting, and or restoring environments that enhance reasonable behavior. It also predicts what the likely outcome will be when these conditions are not met and diagnoses problem situations. Environmental psychology explores such dissimilar issues as common property resource management, wayfinding in complex settings, the effect of environmental stress on human performance, the characteristics of restorative environments, human information processing, and the promotion of durable conservation behavior. Let's move on to the principles underlying environmental psychology. The first principle is that of holistic. Neither people nor the environment is or should be broken down into small parts for analysis. Rather, what should be studied is how we respond in general to a whole setting in which we behave. This principle of environmental psychology contrasts quite strongly with other traditions in psychology. Traditional psychology tries to simplify or break into small components in order to investigate and measure the setting as a whole. Now, environmental psychologists suggest that complexity is what is interesting, and we need to modify rather simplistic ideas of cause and effect. Second is the relations between systems that is important. A consequence of the holistic approach means that environmental psychology is looking in the round at more complex issues. Systems made up of the interrelation of variables which seem to work as a whole are more interesting and difficult to study. Example, the use of paper causes deforestation of forests in order to make them, thereby affecting the ecological content of an area, which in turn causes several species to go extinct. This in turn becomes a cause for concern for people who might then limit their use of paper in order to slow down, if not stop, the rate of deforestation. The third is free will. Environmental psychology assumes that the behavior of people is not determined only by their environments. We can change the way we behave, or we can change the environment that we live in. Environmental psychologists consider the fact that we are constantly attempting to change or mold our immediate environment to be one of the most fundamental aspects of our relationship with the environment. Moving on to everyday natural settings. A crucial and basic premise of environmental psychology is that behavior must happen on site. Environmental psychologists believe that it makes no sense trying to formulate artificial analogues of the environment, which we can control in order to measure how people react within the artificial constraints of control. In practice, of course, environmental psychologists do produce controlled environments in their methodology, but a lot of emphasis is on real people and the real world. This is difficult to do, both practically and can raise some ethical problems as well. The next issue is the problem orientation of research. Environmental psychology, in common with lots of other areas of applied psychology, tends to be inductive rather than deductive. That is, it tends to work in a bottom-up approach, going from observations up to theory. Also, environmental psychology is by its very nature pragmatic. With one or two exceptions, environmental psychology has taken methods and concepts from numerous other disciplines, including non-psychological ones like aesthetics, geography, etc. And in some cases, environmental psychology work is criticized for not looking like real or proper psychology. Let's move on to the inter or multidisciplinary work. The nature of environmental psychology is such that environmental psychology has within it is a diversity of approach and borrows from and works with other disciplines. Let's move on to the basic assumptions about environmental psychology. The first basic assumption about environmental psychology is that different groups are affected differentially by environmental influences. The environmental changes depending on the people who perceive or transact with it. The same or similar physical or structural environment may be interpreted differently by different groups of people. The differential nature of this effect may be due to the culture, it could be because of the experience, expectation, or a variety of other variables. The second assumption is that differential effects and extent of influence occurs. Some behaviors are more susceptible to environmental influence than others. For example, in buildings, lighting changes can alter mood simply, rapidly and extensively for most people. On the other hand, it has little effect on work rate, learning ability, attitudes and values. Many influences are unconscious. This is the next assumption. The unconscious influence process is one which is often used by environmental manipulators. Supermarket layout is a good example. You get more tempted to buy a particular item that's on display even if you really do not require it. Representation involves mental images. Our understanding of space and spatial concepts is a crucial part of our survival system. Representing a three-dimensional system and carrying it with us requires some sort of internal map. The nature of this map seems to have many shared features between individuals, and it also has some idiosyncratic properties. What seems to be the case is that the map is influenced by personal, psychological factors, and it may or may not reflect reality. Space and place have symbolic meanings for us. Our existence, experience, culture are crammed with symbolic representations to do with space. We seem to hold stereotypes of space. Our language reflects the notion that the top is better than the bottom, high life is better than low life, and you may look up to people you admire and look down on people you despise. Cultural significant representations abound, and the bigger something is more important and significant than it actually is. The next topic that we are going to cover is the theories of environmental psychology. First is adaptation level approaches, which states that each of us becomes accustomed to a certain level of environmental stimulation. The common occurrences of too much or too little stimulation is a focus of arousal, overload or underload and stress. A stimulus load outside of our preferred or experienced adaptation level will affect a wide variety of our behaviors. The next is the stimulation approaches. Stimulation approaches conceptualize the physical environment as a source of sensory information that is crucial to our welfare. It suggests that one can categorize stimulation as either simple information composed of light, color, sound, noise, heat, etc., and complex sensory information that comes from buildings, streets, other people, and so on. Both types of stimulus information vary in amount, intensity, duration, frequency, etc., and also they may vary in meaning. The variation in meaning which we attribute to stimuli, our own, perhaps very personal psychological assessment, require multiple measures and techniques from attitude scaling to qualitative assessment of interview data and the like. The next theory is that of control theories and approaches. These suggest that a crucial feature of our environmental transactions is the control we have or think that we have over the stimulation. Control approaches maintain that those people who have greater control of the stimulation coming to them are better off than those who don't. A consequence of lack of control is a pattern of resistance. It is called the reactance behavior, in which we attempt to regain lost control of freedom. Learned helplessness may be a consequence of situations where attempts to regain control meet with lack of success. Moving on to the next theory, which is the behavior setting theory. The behavior setting theory is a different type of theoretical approach. It states that there is consistent prescribed patterns of behavior which exist in different settings. In every similar situation, there are recurrent patterns of behavior which are predictable. All parties seem to know and respect the script. Work from this orientation tends to try and describe the rules that seem to exist, and the emphasis is on the similarity of behaviors between people in the same setting. Also, much time is given over to looking at the features which change within settings over fairly lengthy periods of socio-cultural change. The next set of theories are integral theories, which are attempts to look at the full complexity of everyday person-environment influences. This has two sub-approaches. Firstly, the interactionist approach, which proposes that the person and the environment are separable entities, but one influences the other. They are continually engaged. Well, the other approach is the transactionalism approach, which suggests that the person and the environment are part of one inclusive entity and that neither the person nor the environment can be defined without reference to the other. The person's behavior is a part of the environment and the environment makes up part of the person's behavior. Now, this is transactionalism. Environmental psychology is a field of psychology that focuses on the study of how humans are affected by their environments or surroundings. Like I told you before, they study human reactions to environments in order to gain some insight on how the environments can be changed to manipulate people's feelings, thoughts, and possibly actions in them. For example, an environmental psychologist might study store patrons in order to figure out how to make them stay longer and purchase more. Or they might study employees in a company to figure out how to make them more productive. Why do we need the environmental psychologists? Like I told you earlier, our settings affect us much more than many of us actually even realize. Did you know that the windows that are too small or ceilings that are too low can make most people feel as though they are in a tiny, cramped room? However, a larger window and a higher ceiling in a room of the same size typically feels much larger to us. An environmental psychologist's purpose is to determine which aspects of an environment can be changed to change a person's perception of their environment and how those changes should take place. Generally speaking, an environmental psychologist can help manipulate how people feel and act in certain spaces. Of course, environmental psychologists will typically use their power for good rather than evil and use their skills to create more pleasant environments for everyone. One example is the work of an environmental psychologist in workplace. By changing just a few aspects of the space like paintings or lighting or certain restrictions, an environmental psychologist can create a space where employees feel much more comfortable and therefore more productive. What does an environmental psychologist do? Many environmental psychologists choose to specialize in specific area in this field. Some work to create more harmonious interior spaces, for instance, while others work to create more pleasant and enjoyable outdoor spaces. One of the main duties of environmental psychologists is to study humans and their reactions to certain aspects of their environments. Through these studies, psychologists will often see how people's actions and thoughts are affected by their environments. This might be done through direct observation or through focus groups or surveys. Armed with this knowledge, the psychologists can make a reasonable assumption as to how the environments can be changed for the better. Environmental psychologists will also usually make suggestions on how to change these environments in order to accomplish certain goals. These goals may be as simple as making people feel more at ease in certain social situations to making people feel more comfortable as they walk through their cities. As an environmental psychologist, you might also have a hand in creating spaces and environments for people to live, work, play and relax in. For example, he might be called upon to help set up interiors of a building or recommend design elements that create a sense of well-being. Overall, the role of an environmental psychologist focuses on solving problems and creating positive perceptions of space, big and small. Moving forward to the challenges. The field saw significant research findings and a fair surge of interest in the late 1970s and early 1980s, but has seen challenges of nomenclature, obtaining objective and repeatable results, scope, and the fact that some research rests on underlying assumptions about human perception, which is not fully understood. Being an interdisciplinary field is a difficult task because it lacks a solid definition and purpose. It is hard for the field to fit into organizational structures. In the words of Guido Francescato, speaking in 2000, environmental psychology encompasses a somewhat bewildering array of disparate methodologies, conceptual orientations and interpretations, making it difficult to delineate with any degree of precision just what the field is all about and what might contribute to the construction of society and the unfolding of history. Environmental psychology has not received nearly enough supporters to be considered an interdisciplinary field within psychology. Prushansky was one of the founders of environmental psychology and was quoted as saying, "As I look into the field of environmental psychology today, I am concerned about its future." It has not, since its emergence in the early 1960s, grown to a point where it can match the fields of social, personality, learning, or cognitive psychology. To be sure, it has increased in membership, in the number of journals devoted to it, and even in the amount of professional, organizational support it enjoys, but not enough so that one could look at any major university and find it to be a field of specialization in a department of psychology, or more importantly, in an interdisciplinary center or institute. Let me summarize what I have taught you. Environmental psychology is an interdisciplinary field focused on the interplay between humans and their surroundings. The field defines the term environment broadly, encompassing natural environments, social settings, built environments, learning environments, and informational environments. Since its conception, the field has been committed to the development of a discipline that is both value-oriented and problem-oriented, prioritizing research aimed at solving complex environmental problems in the pursuit of individual well-being within a larger society. It is aimed at designing, managing, protecting, and/or restoring environments that enhance reasonable behavior. There is a very clear-cut distinctiveness of environmental psychology. Most psychologists examine the relations between environmental stimuli and human responses in one way or another. However, what sets environmental psychology apart is its commitment to research and practice that subscribe to the following goals and principles. These are: improve the built environment and the stewardship of natural resources. Secondly, study everyday settings, or let's say close stimulations of them. Thirdly, consider person and setting as a holistic entity. Fourthly, recognize that individuals actively cope with and shape their environments. They do not passively respond to the environmental forces. So they are not only active, they might be catalysts to change in their environments. And finally, work in conjunction with other disciplines. The principles underlying the environmental psychology are: number one, it is a holistic field. Secondly, there is importance of relations between systems. Then there is a concept of free will. Next is everyday natural settings, followed by problem orientation of research, and then inter or multidisciplinary work. The basic assumptions of environmental psychology are: different groups are affected differently by environmental influences. Different effects and extents of influences occur. Many influences are unconscious. Representation involves mental images. Space and place have symbolic meanings. Next, I had talked to you about the various theories of environmental psychology, which are: number one, adaptation level approach. Second was stimulation approaches. Then was control theories and approaches. The fourth was behavior setting theory. And finally, we had talked about the integral theory.